entire course. The students watched 22 hours of videotaped lecture. Typically, this course would contain about 33 hours of lecture if I were teaching live. My recommendation is to flip the part of the course that doesn't change. If there are parts of the course, the content that change, I would not flip that. But there are some things in engineering that never change. There are theories and concepts that I can record and they won't change year to year. So that allows the students to watch those things and I don't have to change it every year. This is a very important question because if you're going to flip the classroom, then you really need to use that class time in a way that's valuable to the students. My recommendation is to make it as active and engaging as possible. For me, that meant about 2/3 of the time we use for problem solving. That's a big part of what engineering students do at the university, and so that allows them to really deepen their understanding because they're working on problems in groups. I'm there to help them. And that's where a lot of that learning really takes place. It allows me as the instructor to get them right when they're stuck and help them get over those humps. Other things that I did during class time was I took them on field trips. Because of the nature of my course, environmental engineering, we were able to tour some things on campus that directly applied to what I was teaching them in the videos, in the content. I also had guest speakers, and we also did some brainstorming sessions. So the bottom line is once you open up that class time, I think you can do all the things you've always wanted to do as a teacher, and that's what I found that I was able to do. Another very important question, how do you know that students are watching the video? My recommendation here, and what I did, was they were required to do online assessment before they came to class. It was a low-stakes quiz, maybe worth about 10% of their grade total, and it asked fairly basic questions about the material that they had observed in the video. And they could open that quiz while they were watching the video, so they can be interacting with both the quiz and the video at the same time. I would even recommend that you intersperse the questions within the video, which is my next step when I flip again, so that the students are actually getting that immediate feedback to check for understanding. You could also use things like clickers in the classroom, anything that really serves as a gate check to make sure that they are watching the video and getting that content online. I created short 5 to 15 minute videos, and I created a number of them every week that encompassed a module. So we had a weekly module made up of short 5 to 15 minute videos. The way that I did it was I had my notes in a Word form that I turned into a PDF, and they were outline notes that I filled in using a tablet screen so the students could write along with me. In addition, for my videos, you could see a picture of me at the bottom right. That's something that people can decide whether they like that or not, especially for a purely online course, which remember I was doing both. I think that's very advantageous. The students get to see you and see how you interact with them, but not required. In my case, I needed help creating the videos, and I worked with some technical staff. And actually, the videos that I created were also used for online summer courses. So I was able to kind of double dip, if you say, in that way. I did not actually use any other technical staff, but it would be very advantageous to use instructional designers, instructional technologists, or other faculty who might ensure that the videos that you're creating are in fact exactly what the students need. Anytime you introduce something new, students at first are going to be a little bit nervous. And at first my students were nervous about what this would mean for them. I remember one student, after the first class, when I explained what a flipped classroom was, he came up at the end of the class and he said, "I don't like this. I think that you are trying to, or that we're going to have to teach ourselves." That's what he said. "We're going to have to teach ourselves." And I said, "That's actually the opposite. I will be here more to help you teach, to help you learn, excuse me. And you won't have to teach yourself, because when you go home and work on homework, that's when you have to teach yourself." So that's what I told him, and by the end of the semester he believed me. But let me tell you what I think is very important to get buy-in from students. You need to explain to them that you're on their side and that this flipped classroom will help them in their understanding. And you need to be fair to the students. You don't want to use this as a chance to push more material at them or make them work more than what they think they're already working. And I think that's really important. And they'll see that you're really out for their best and their reaction should be generally positive. There's still about 1/4 of the students who don't feel comfortable with a flipped environment because they're not used to it. And that's okay with me because the 3/4 who do like it really prefer it over any other type of classroom. About 5 years ago, I was teaching a large engineering classroom. I had about 80 or 90 students in the class, and I would teach traditionally. I was lecturing on the board, the students would listen and dutifully take notes, then I would assign a homework assignment that was due on Fridays. On Thursday evenings, I would have office hours where the students could come and talk to me about their questions and get all their questions answered. And it was during one of these office hours that I decided to flip my class. You see, during this office hour, we had about 5 or 6 students sitting around a table, and they were asking really good questions about the homework. These were conceptual questions, but they were questions that I had already answered in the lecture. But during the lecture, they were taking notes, but they weren't really understanding the material. And then after I addressed some of their questions, a new student came in, and they asked the same question that I had just asked. So instead of me answering again, I asked the students who were in the room to explain to the new student what I had told them. And then they were teaching each other. And now I really saw even a deeper understanding of the material as they had to teach their peer about what they had learned. And that kind of interaction is what I wanted to see in the classroom. But there was a challenge, which was how do I cover the technical material and still engage students in the classroom? And that's where the idea of this flipped classroom came into play. I had some online videos, and I thought, what if the students watch those videos and then they can use that material in the classroom to deepen their understanding? That's why I decided to flip. I had 3 main expectations. The one is that the classroom would be more loud and engaging, and that is exactly what I see. When I let my students loose with a brainstorming question, or when I give them a clicker question, or when I ask them to work on homework together, I see engagement, I hear noise, I see them interacting with each other. That's what I wanted to see. The second expectation that I had is that the students would come to class prepared. And I did mostly see that because I had the gate check, the students were watching the video and coming to class prepared. Of course, it's not always perfect, and sometimes they're not as engaged as I would like them to be. And the last expectation that I had was that students would perform better on their summative assessment. And in fact, my research has shown that they performed exactly the same. So although I did not see changes in their summative assessment, I did see changes in our engagement and even in classroom climate. I think the biggest challenge for flipping a classroom is creating the online content. The content, because it's reused and it's difficult to change, you want it to be done right. And I felt that I had to make it much more organized than I normally would have in a live lecture. So I think that takes a lot of thought to think about how you might create that online content. My suggestion would be that you actually do a live lecture one semester with the notes that you've created. Get a little bit of feedback from the students before you create the video. I think it's important to try it out first. That's what I would recommend. The most difficult thing for me to manage was what to do during the class time, specifically how much time to spend reviewing the material. So when my students watch the video online, they take an online quiz, and as part of that, I ask them to write a question that they have about the video content. Before class, I look at all those questions, and I actually write a lot of them down, copy and paste without the names, so the students can know what questions their classmates had. And I spend time answering those questions. And I struggle sometimes knowing how much to review and how much time to give them to work on the problems. If I don't review enough, the students feel frustrated because they don't completely understand the material. But if I review too much, the students feel cheated out of the class time that they could be interactive. So I think that's something that each instructor needs to decide and play with a little bit. I would recommend about 10 minutes of review, but I know that sometimes I go a little over that, and so I would really recommend sticking with that. At the time that I started flipping my classroom, there was not much evidence on flipping the classroom in terms of student learning. But there was a lot of evidence showing that active learning helps students learn the material. And so really flipping just allowed me to increase my active learning in the classroom, the active learning of the students. So really it wasn't so much that there was research-based evidence for flipping, more research-based evidence for active learning. My observation was that students were not engaged during the lecture time. Students were passively taking notes, and when I would ask them or probe them to see what they've learned, I found they did not learn during that time very well. Very surface learning. And what I wanted to see was a deeper learning take place in the classroom. I also noticed when they came to office hours, they had not retained the information during the lecture. And that's why I wanted to improve what was happening during the class time. In engineering, there's a lot of research showing that active learning benefits students. That is what I was trying to replicate. So that problem solving in groups, problem solving with instructor feedback, just-in-time learning, all of those things have been thoroughly researched. That's what I was trying to do in the classroom, but flipping allowed me to make sure the technical material was covered. I was trained to flip by trial and error. I tried many things, and they didn't all work out. And I can provide some literature based on that. I actually think in this case it's very important to explain to your students why you've decided to flip your classroom. When I first started teaching about 15 years ago, I was told not to defend my teaching styles to my students, and I still agree with that. But in this case, on the very first day when they come in, I show them some slides about why I think flipping is the best thing for them. I also show them student feedback. Because I've been flipping for a number of years now, I have students that have written things about why they prefer flipping, and I share that with the students. I also share with them how they can best perform in a flipped classroom, and most of that comes from recommendations from other students. So in this case, I think it's very important that you explain why you've decided to take the flipped approach to a classroom. We found that 3/4 of the students would prefer to take a flipped classroom given the same instructor. There were 3 main reasons, they said, for deciding that they would prefer a flipped classroom. The first one is flexibility in learning. They liked being in control of how they learned, when they watched the video content, how often, whether they rewatched it. They liked to have flexibility in learning. The second thing they said, which is related to flexibility, is that they really enjoyed being able to rewatch the videos. If they fell asleep, they dozed off for a minute, they weren't paying attention, they could realize it, just like when you're reading a book and you sort of fall asleep. You can go back a few pages and catch yourself up. You can't do that in a live lecture. They really like that. And the third thing they said is they really like the interaction with the faculty and the students in the class time. Especially in a large engineering classroom, they don't always get that interaction. They felt more comfortable asking questions privately to an instructor rather than in front of a large classroom of 80 or 90 students. Those are the 3 things that students preferred: flexibility in learning, rewatching the videos, and being able to interact with students and faculty in the classroom. In my course, it makes sense to flip the part of the course that has technical content that does not change. So if there are concepts, problem-solving techniques, equations that have not changed, I think that's best done in a video online content. For other things like discussions, brainstorming, actual problem solving where the students are doing the problem solving, I think that's best done in the classroom. What I found in the end was that students preferred the flipped classroom when it was done right, and that it improved classroom climate. So I would definitely have some recommendations that you all can look at if you want to flip your classroom so you don't make some of the mistakes I made. In this video, I want to share with you some tips and tricks for flipping a classroom. To do this, I want to use an acronym called NEWS, N-E-W-S. And the goal of this is to engage students during the class time and avoid student rebellion. The N in NEWS is no additional workload. I recommend you do not use flipping to add more to a student's schedule. Second, I recommend the E is for experiential learning in the classroom. Make sure that the students are actively engaged and they're having good learning experiences in the classroom. Thirdly, weekly assessments, both summative and formative, and short video segments. Let me give you a little more detail on these. Also, if you want to find out more, I show a link here for a paper that we wrote on this that shows the research evidence for these 4 items. The first one is no additional workload. Make sure that your flipped classroom is a true flip. Don't use this as an opportunity to add even more. So when I first started flipping, I had homework and then we had class assignments. Don't do that. Use the homework in class so that you don't add more to their already busy schedule. Second, experiential learning. In my case, I use the class time for engaged problem solving, as you can see on the left. Or on the right, field trips. You can see them here engaged in the community, seeing what's happening around them, applying what they've learned in a new way. That could be during discussion, brainstorming, bringing in guest speakers. Make sure they are engaged in the topic. Weekly assessments to keep students on track. One of the downfalls of a flipped classroom could be that students don't keep up with the material. They're not coming to class to get the material, they're doing it at home. So in my case, the students would watch all the videos of the week before coming to class on Monday morning. At home, they would be watching the videos and taking the online assessments as shown here. But this is key to have a formative gate check before coming to class. This could be questions interspersed within the video content, or in my case, an online quiz they take before coming to class. It's due actually midnight the night before the class. I would say this should be low stakes, not worth very much, but worth enough that the students complete it. In my case, I also use this for the students to ask questions. I gather all those questions before class and then try to address as many questions as possible during class time. In addition, I recommend that you use summative weekly or bi-weekly assessments. So this is where the students really show you what they learn. And this can be high stakes. My quizzes were worth 50% of their final grade. We also had a cumulative final exam that was another 20%. And so students know that even if they don't watch the video, they've got to watch it before this big summative quiz or test that they have. I recommend you do that at least weekly or bi-weekly so that students don't fall behind. The S in NEWS is short video segments. So in my case, this shows all the modules that we had in 1 week that were less than about 2 hours, but each individual video was about 5 to 10 minutes. Now you can see here there was one that went for 14, 18 minutes. I would try to avoid that, but if you have to finish a complete thought, that's okay. But the goal should be to keep your videos between about 5 and 10 minutes each. So those are my tips and tricks. No additional workload, experiential learning during class time, weekly assessments, and short video segments. Thank you.